So, Anne, would you like to start walking with us? Welcome.
Thank you. My task for today is to make a first talk about the topic bodily tactile languaging. And another part of my task is to talk about it from the perspective of communicative relations and partner competence. So communicative relations is a different book, not the book that has been released today. It is this book. This book, it's written by Inger Røbro and myself. It's available in English from Statped on the homepage, and if you want to access it and you can't access it, you can mail me. My mail address is on the PowerPoint. Is it working better? Yes. Do I have to repeat it? No. No. Communicative relations is about how a communicative relatedness is built up from the beginning between a person with congenital deafblindness and a sighted and hearing communication partner. It's an intervention model that's built on theory that is relevant in encounter with congenital deafblindness, and it's also built on a lot of case studies by other people and also by ourselves and by myself over very many years. So it has quite a solid empirical basis. It's relevant to ask, of course, how is it connected? How are basic communicative relations connected to languaging in the bodily tactile modality? And I will try to argue today that it has everything to do with languaging, that it describes its roots and its origin. I will also make aware of the fact that the presentations we hear today are also, not mine, but the others, are also master theses based on master theses at Groningen University, and therefore they are contributions to the knowledge that we have today, and very important contributions. We've had a very nice collaboration between Statped, NKDB, and Groningen University for many years, so it's a very nice way to collaborate with the university system to develop knowledge from the practical field. So there are more things to read than books. There are also these theses, which are very interesting. I will illustrate the essence of the topic I will talk about with this photo. The man is Göran. You will hear him speak later. And the woman is me. But we are role-playing an image from reality. It looked exactly like this. And I am in the role of the deafblind person, and Göran is in the role of the sighted and hearing communication partner. This is a glimpse. It's just one moment out of a sequence which has been microanalyzed many times. So we know what's happening before, what's happening after, and what we know the story many years back, and we know how the story goes many years forward. So this glimpse, I will call it a semiotic moment. It's a moment of where language is used for the purpose of meaning making. And I think that captures the essence of languaging, at least how I understand it. So languaging here has two basic components. One of them has to do with the gesture. I'm in the role of the deafblind making this gesture. It's a creative gesture. It is not acquired. I have made it as a deafblind person myself. I have created it myself. This gesture has an embodied content. It's possible to analyze it and to find the possible meaning, the meaning that it can have if you go back in the experiences of the person with deafblindness. And it has a bodily, tactile, expressive form. I repeat, it has an embodied content structure. And it has a bodily, tactile, expressive form, which we will hear more about. And lastly, it has dialogical addressivity. It is addressed in a dialogical space. And a dialogical space means that it's a space, a mental space, consisting of me and other, of self and other. And the relation between self and other can be structured in a number of ways in a conversation. And on this moment here, my attention in the role of the deafblind person is on the gesture. It's not on what the gesture means. It's not on what I can obtain by it. It's on the gesture itself. My attention is on my gesture, and not only that, but on the attention of my partner to the gesture, to the same gesture, and on the reciprocation of the partner of the same gesture on his own body. And I will argue that this is the essence and the origin of languaging, where in this case, the boy and his partner are making a piece of language together. They are co-creating a piece of language, and this piece of language means that the child can afterwards go on to use it in further meaning making, to make sense, to use it in together with other signs to make meaning, or alone to make meaning of other things. It is something that can be used in meaning making, a piece of language. The outline of my talk is that I will make an introduction by pointing to an old story, and then I will pass to the notion of languaging in relation to pedagogy, and then a notion of basic communicative relations. And on the basis of these two notions, I will ask, what does the notion of languaging add to the intervention model communicative relation in terms of partner competence, and vice versa? Congenital deafblindness challenges how we understand language. Congenital deafblindness is a very peripheral way of being in the world, a very special circumstance, far out in the periphery of human ecology. And it's very rare. So our interest, of course, is not only in helping the congenitally deafblind, but it's also in what they make us understand. It goes two ways. We understand something which otherwise is not so easily understood from the especially about language, thinking, and communication, which for us, because we are not special, just ordinary, because we are ordinary, language is not the problem for us. Communication is not the problem for us. Languaging is not the problem. We don't need the words, we just do it. We don't need to understand what it's about. We don't need theories. And the problem for the science or knowledge about language and communication is that normally, we don't need to understand what it is. So any theory goes. It happens anyway. We don't need the theory because we just do it. So it's just out of particular interest that we need theories about language. And congenital deafblindness is very interesting in this way that we really need theory. We don't, because it doesn't happen by itself, and we don't understand what is happening. Sometimes things happen and we don't understand it, so we need theory. So we have to ask what understandings of language, what ways to understand language are relevant, and what ways to understand it are less relevant. So we can argue then that an activity-based understanding of language is more relevant than one that sees language as a particular system of signs. Because we can then look at what the deafblind person is actually doing. Not what he should do or does not do, but what's he doing and how is he doing. Trying to understand, describe, document what's actually happening, instead of looking for what is not happening or what should happen. And it's a relational understanding of language is more relevant because congenital deafblindness, if it's not relational, it's total isolation. So it means that the relational understanding of language is made relevant by congenital deafblindness. without the relation, nothing's happening. So the relation is necessary condition. It's a necessary part of languaging, and we see it because of congenital deaf blindness. And the embodied perspectives on languaging are more relevant than perspectives on languaging which do not consider embodiment. That, of course, has to do with the fact that congenital deaf blindness is such an extremely bodily, tactile circumstance. It's prominently bodily tactile compared to other circumstances. Congenital deaf blindness triggers the question of how language from the outside, language from society, from the linguistic practice around us, how that can meet language concepts from the inside. How the language from the outside can meet language from the inside. I come back to that. And this question is not new. It has been addressed and addressed again and again in the history of deafblind education. On YouTube, still on YouTube, I think, at least yesterday, there was a French trailer of the film Marie's Story. I don't know if the whole film is still there, but the French trailer is still there. So you can look at YouTube for Marie's Story, and you will find a fragment of this film. This trailer is when Sister Marguerite is trying to language. Is trying to language with Marie. Marie is the congenitally deafblind. She's the only congenitally deafblind child in the history of deafblind education whose story has been documented, and also her language development, her communication development has been documented. It's different from Helen Keller, because Helen Keller was not congenitally deafblind, but Marie was. This film, and this clip shows that Sister Marguerite was able to capture what could be an embodied concept of Marie. And Marie was very much attached to her knife. She had a knife with her from her family. She was a farmer's daughter, and she had a knife, and she was very much attached to this knife. So Sister Marguerite knew that she had an embodied concept of this knife, or how to act with a knife, how to cut with a knife. So the first sign that she gave her, her first language was sign language, not spoken language. The first sign that Sister Marguerite gave her was the sign for cutting with a knife, for a knife. And she, because of the similarity of the cutting with the knife, when she made it tactile, and the embodied concept of the knife, it was possible for Marie to map the sign to the concept. And this mapping is absolutely necessary for languaging in a bodily tactile modality. The meeting, the point where it's possible to make a meeting point between the language from the inside and the language from the outside. It's a very particular challenge in congenital deafblindness, because it's not possible without radical acts of abstraction from the point of view of sighted hearing culture. So languaging connects to a socio-cultural perspective on language. Languaging has to do with language as activity and not language as a system of signs. I'm sure we'll hear more about that later today. It allows for linguistic creativity. It means that signs can be created, don't have to be learned or acquired. Yeah, we come back to that. This is an example. It was a created sign. Language is about making sense of the world by way of a system of signs. That's according to the definition. I don't know what the system of signs means here. You could perhaps say that also congenital deafblind have a system of signs, but not the same as the conventional system. But the system of signs that are used to make meaning, that's the whole point. The system of signs is used to make meaning, and it's used to build knowledge about the world. The point of languaging has to do with meaning. It's the making of meaning, the making of sense, and the making of language in order to make sense, in order to make meaning. And the use of language in order to make sense, in order to make meaning, in order to build knowledge. And Languaging has also to do with an experiential perspective. It's a perspective of somebody in the world. It's language from an experiential perspective. Languaging is a natural way of using language beyond normative constraints. That's why it's relevant to congenital deafblindness. It has no normative constraints, no linguistic rules. So everything, you can do everything to make meaning, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that too today. Languaging opens new directions to pedagogy. It foregrounds quality. Quality has to do with experience. It has languaging has to do with the experiencing subjects, experiencing relations. And it has to do with identity, so that languaging is from a particular perspective, like I said. It has to do with agency in the production of meaning. That means that we are active agent when we produce meaning. It's not something that we do automatically or because we have learned it or instructed to do it, but it's something we are engaged in. It means that you can have a very high languaging agency with very low formal linguistic competence. That's the point for us. You can have high languaging agency, low formal linguistic competence. And it has to be with learner autonomy. That means that the learner is self-dependent in making meaning. He's not independent, but he's doing it himself. So the challenge for the teacher is to verbalize the student's needs, meaning to put language, to put other parts of language on on the languaging that is already there. I'm sure we will hear more about that too. So bodily tactile languaging, the notion of bodily tactile relates languaging, which is a universal human activity. Everybody's doing it. Everybody's doing it everywhere in the world. It relates that to the atypical case of congenital deafblindness. So what is particularly human is languaging. It is the most human of all activities. It is to engage in making sense and making meaning. And other mammals don't do that so much. For other mammals, like cats and dogs and chimpanzees, the meaning is more there. But humans have no meaning, no sense, nothing. So we have to make it all the time. We make all the meaning that are in our lives, and we are meaning-making creatures. And it's a connection between language and meaning-making, which is particular in the concept of languaging. So our task then is to detect how persons with congenital deafblindness engage in languaging. It is not a question of if they do it. It is a question of how they do it. That's also different from asking, do they have language, yes or no? That's not relevant here. The relevant question is, how do they engage in languaging? And languaging in terms of communicative relations. Languaging, when we look at that in terms of communicative relations, it grounds languaging developmentally in 4 basic environmental relations. And the spontaneous gestures have embodied content, this one, for example, which includes emotion. So emotion is a very basic component of languaging. And it comes from making sense of interactional experience. So it comes from thinking, from cognitive activity. Making sense of impressions of being in the world is a very basic cognitive activity in the congenitally deafblind. And we see that sense-making in terms of spontaneous gestures. That's how we observe it, that's how it comes to the fore. It's the beginning of languaging. These basic environmental relations are all dynamically structured in a dialogical manner between self and other. So there is no languaging that can happen in isolation. And communicative relations defines partner competence in terms of the 4 basic ego-alter relations. Ego-alter means self and other. self and other. In terms of other directed positions and perspectives. So the four basic roles that the partner can have, one of them is the role of the social interaction partners, and that is a role that's based on identification. Two roles are very similar. They are interchangeable and similar. And then it's like a playmate or an interaction partner, equal in that kind of relation. Then there's the role of the provider of basic emotional trust. That role is played out in attachment relations, where there is exchange about the co-regulation of emotional distance. And we see that co-regulation as a regulation of physical distance. Physical distance is at the same time a regulation of the emotional distance. Everybody's got a baby. At least two of you have small babies in the audience here, I know. You will recognize this, the play with the emotional distance over physical distance. To begin with, it's within arm's length, within 30 centimeters. And then it's extended. When there is a play with emotional distance, and that has been established, then the role of the other person is the provider of basic emotional trust. And when the role is the provider of basic emotional trust, we can observe it because the person, whether it is a sighted hearing person or any person or a deafblind person, we can observe that the person will go away, move away from the secure base and explore the world. So exploration alone is an indication of basic trust. So these roles all go together and are dyadic. They are in dyadic relations where there's a reciprocal relation between the two and where they regulate the distance to each other emotionally, mentally, physically, along all these basic dimensions. The fourth role is a role of the conversation partner, and that is where the languaging comes in most concretely. The role of the conversation partner was illustrated in the first photo, where Göran played the partner. The conversational interaction is extremely complex when we look at it in detail. It has a lot of perspective shifts, position shifts, and shifts between the role of listener to another, talking to another, and thinking for self. It's extremely much more complex than the basic dyadic relations dynamically. We don't know that it's so complex because it goes by itself, but we know that it's complex when we try to see how it goes with the congenitally deafblind. So this illustration from communicative relations captures all these relations. It's read from bottom up and from the left to the right. At the bottom, there is trust. So a partner must trust in the other person. Otherwise, nothing will happen. So we have to say that in the role of the partner, we need to trust in the other for languaging to happen. We need to trust that the other can engage in languaging. Otherwise, there will be no languaging. And we'll see no languaging. So given that there is trust, we will expect that these three dyadic relations will develop. That the person with deafblindness will engage in social interactive play, in co-regulation of emotional distance, and in exploration from base. When these ways of relating to the world are established and stable, we will see that the deafblind person produces gestures himself based on these experiences. And these spontaneous gestures go back to making sense of experiences in either one or all of these basic relations. These spontaneous gestures are to begin with not addressed to another person. They are addressed to self. It means that they are addressed in a mental dialogical space where in the position of thinking, if we think about a dialogical space, we are not addressed to nobody, we are addressed to ourselves. So we project ourselves in the role of the other in a dialogical space when we are thinking, when we are addressing ourselves. Based on these gestures, humans form, or we can form, we can plan to form a third pattern, a third frame, and that is the conversational frame, which is most relevant for languaging. The fourth frame is a conversational frame, and between them in the drawing, there's a triangle, and in the triangle is a symbol. It means that this is a triadic relation with a third element, and the third element is a symbol. The third element is a piece of language or a symbol. That has to do with the semiotic triad. And if you think it's a difficult word, you can go to the Frogner Park and look at one of the sculptures by Gustav Vigeland. It's probably the most archetypical sculpture of the semiotic triad, at least that I know about, and a lot of people agree. And Vigeland was not thinking about deafblind, but still it is a very bodily expression of the semiotic triad. And it means that the bodily features of languaging consist of spatial features, first and foremost, body in space, and we'll hear more about that today, later. These features are postures, movements, gestures. And the sculpture by Vigeland maps onto the stripped spatial concept of a semiotic meaning-making and sign-making triad, or to tertiary intersubjectivity. It means we can take away the baby and put a sign in there instead, and it will look exactly like intersubjectivity in a bodily tactile modality with a congenital deafblind person. I've seen many glimpses like that, and I'm sure you others have seen that too. We always perceive the world dialogically. So when we perceive this little guy here, we don't perceive a sculpture. We perceive an angry boy, and that's also the name of the sculpture. And we perceive him to be addressed to somebody. We perceive him as uttering something. So this bodily posture and movement is perceived as an utterance, as an other-directed utterance. At least that's how I perceive him, and I know a lot of people have perceived him like that because his left hand is golden, and it means that people from all over the world have touched him, identified with him, so it's brushed because of all the people who identify with this utterance. So we perceive something dialogically. We perceive an utterance, and that's how we perceive an utterance. Some assumptions about the origin of bodily tactile languaging from a perspective of communicative relations. That bodily dimensions of languaging come from within self, are grounded in making sense of interactional experience, and are charged with other directedness, dialogicality, and embodied schematized emotion. And tactile dimensional languaging come from being in touch with others' languaging about features in the shareable outside surrounding world. So I'm proposing here a differentiation between bodily dimensions that refer to embodiment and bodily dimension that refer to tactile, more tactile, from being in touch with the outside world. I don't know if it holds, but it's an assumption here. The bodily languaging from within is more robust than the tactile languaging from the outside. And it means that the bodiliness and the embodiment will be transparent in the expressions of the tactile features. And we'll hear about that too, I think, in Göran's presentation, or in others too. Bodily features of languaging can take on sophisticated functions in meaning-making and sign-making activity, that is, in languaging of the deafblind. So we must not think of bodily tactile languaging as something that is pre-verbal, pre-linguistic, or belonging to an early stage of development. But it's more that we have to look at it as fundamental, and that because it's so robust, it will be transparent in more tactile parts of languaging. So languaging as activity emerges within the cultural frame of conversational interactivity. and they are recycled as utterances in conversational interactivity, and they are gestural in origin, narratively embodied and dialogical, and grounded in interactional experience. So we have to know the world of the deafblind person. It's observable as the deafblind person is engaged in making sense, is engaged in making shared meaning, as in engaged in making shared signs. Cognitive relation treats the embodied dialogical origin of languaging, and the model grounds the concept of languaging in relation to deafblindness. But it does not treat the question of how to give access to others' languaging activity beyond the dyad. So, it does something, but not everything. The partner as a mediator of others' languaging, one who gives access to others' languaging, is not treated by the model cognitive relations. So we can pass some questions for later today. How is the concept of languaging useful in relation to the atypical case of congenital deafblindness? How does a person with congenital deafblindness engage in languaging? We will see an example from Johanna, I know. We will see other examples. How can a person with congenital deafblindness engage in languaging with a non-deafblind communication partner? Camilla, at least, will talk about that. Caroline, too. And how can a person with congenital deafblindness access languaging others in a community? That's particularly Caroline's presentation. I think, Caroline. So we'll have several of these questions will be thrown light upon from the coming presentation. So I hope by the end of the day we can summarize a bit what we've been through. Okay, thank you. I don't know if you have any questions. It would be nice if you had.
And I hope that everyone out there have found the chat function, and here in the room you're just free to, if you have some questions. Do you want to say something more, to add something?
If there are no questions.
Good.
So I'll expand a bit. I'll expand a bit on the notion of authentic communication of the congenitally deafblind, because I think it will be mentioned later. The authentic communication of the congenital deafblindness means the expressions, the utterances that come from thinking, that come from making sense, come directly from making sense. It describes exactly the transition from something that's thought about to something that's talked. The articulation of what is being thought. The articulation of what's been thought about. Is that clear? We think about something and we try to articulate it. And that articulation is the authentic communication. That is according to Ragnar Rommetveit, his understanding of authentic communication, and I tried to use it in relation to congenital deafblindness. I think it's very important because the authentic communication, the authentic languaging, it's a part of languaging, of course. It's very essential to languaging. The authentic communication of the congenital deafblindness is the kind of communication that expresses the thinking. And first and foremost, thinking has to do with making sense of impressions. So if I go back to this example, which you saw a photo of, on this moment where, in the real video, in the real case, on this moment, which looked exactly like this boy was making sense of an impression of somebody from the outside, not his partner, a third person. A third person was doing something on his body, like this, and he was engaged in making sense of that impression. He didn't know what it was. So he used a piece of language that he already had for himself, a gesture that he already had, and he created the gesture there and then, on that moment, in a new context, to make sense of a new impression. And this impression, when we wire it back, reminded of another impression of the dog, his dog. His dog, he called it his dog ear biter, because his dog, when he was playing, was biting a little bit in his ear. And the impression of the person doing this reminded him of the impression of the ear biter doing this, which reminded him of the impression of going to the doctors with the blood color pressure around the arm, where something was doing like that on top of the blood pressure color. So one impression was transported by the gesture to another, to a third. So he used it here to make sense of a new impression. So, and when we followed this gesture over years, which we could do, we saw that it was used to make sense of other new impressions. And to verbalize it, to put language on it, we called it pain or hurting. Something that's hurting, but it could also be boring. No, it's because what the embodied content is the building up of tension inside, which comes from somebody exerting pressure on your body from the outside. It can be the ear biter, or it can be at the doctor's, or it can be somebody who's making an impression on your body. So all of that goes back to that embodied feeling of tension building up from the inside. So what we do automatically, everybody is trying to make sense of such impressions, and that is the origin of languaging, as I understand it. And also authentic communication. Yeah.
Thank you, Anne Nafstad. It was very interesting and a good start for the day. So now we're going to have a little break, and we start again 15 minutes past 11.